Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter for boxing-related tweets, or you can subscribe to the channel. Click that notifications button and get a new notification whenever a new video is uploaded. Let's talk boxing. You know, broadly speaking, there are two types of approaches to journalism. The first approach is that old school sort of approach whereby a journalist will dig up, looking to do some investigation, looking to dig up some dirt. He will follow around a politician or authority figure and try to find out what they're not telling them. Then you'll see them chasing them down the street. Excuse me, sir, you said that you did not know Mr. X, and yet on July the 22nd, you were photographed dining at an establishment that he was funding. And he was present at the meal, and do you have anything to say about that? That sort of approach, right? The benefits of that is that when authority seeks to hide something from you, you're more likely to dig up the dirt. You're more likely to find out about corruption, about something conspiratorial. You're more likely to find out something that they are seeking to hide. The second approach when it comes to journalism, and again we are speaking broadly here, is when a journalist seeks to develop a personal relationship with the people he is interested in or she is interested in. And in that scenario, what the journalist is hoping is that they are given access that other journalists are not. In that regard, the benefit is that the person is more likely to want to speak to you. In the first example, while you are digging up the dirt and finding out truth that is perhaps hidden, the person that you're interested in is suspicious of you, and as a result, they clam up around you and they actively seek to withhold information from you. Whereas in the second approach, they're more willing to be open. And so you're more likely to get access as well as an insight into their mindset, but they will only tell you what it is that they want you to know. Now, when it comes to the boxing media, when it comes to a lot of these websites that have managed to make a real success of themselves online, guys that weren't really mainstream sites, they didn't come from these big corporate organizations. What they've managed to do is use that second approach and develop really good relationships with fighters, and they're almost informal in the way that they interview them. And while that will mean that, perhaps they protect fighters in some regards, and a lot of people were very critical of IFL when that Tibbs interview, not just IFL, but a whole bunch of others, when that Tibbs interview first went up regarding Joe Saunders, then got taken down. Because they were talking about a conflict of interest. People were talking about, look, they're seeking to protect the fighters or the trainer or whoever. But by the same token, while that may very well be the case, you also then get interviews like the one you got when Joe Saunders spoke to Umar. I almost called him Umar IFL Umar there, right? But when he spoke to him, he was a lot more open with him. He was a lot more willing to speak his mind. But because Billy Joe has been away for so long, and has only now broken his silence, you have to understand the limitation of that second approach, and that is that you're not necessarily going to dig up the dirt. And therefore, anything Billy Joe says, he has said knowing he would have to answer these questions, knowing that he has planned perhaps his answer to these questions since the Canelo fight. So as a result, what it's able to do is, yes, give you an insight which you might feel as a viewer is an insight whereby it's not digging up the dirt with regards to injuries or what happened behind the scenes and so on and so forth. But it does give you an insight into his mindset. And anything he said, he wanted to say. There were no throwaway comments. And that's what makes this interview so fascinating to me. Because there were a couple of digs in there. A couple of remarks where he left you with crumbs of evidence to consider. Well, that was done on purpose. This wasn't off the cuff. Billy had a chance to think about those things. And that's what, like I said, makes this interview great. So let's talk a little bit about it. First and foremost, he speaks about the injury itself. And he speaks about the fact that a bone was chipped off of the cheekbone, and had he continued to fight, there was the possibility that that chip could have potentially pierced the eye. If there is a dislodged bone, something that I spoke about closer to the fight happening post-fight, it could have potentially caused a very serious eye injury, the ramifications of which would have been great. Now, bear in mind, just to reiterate, I was defending both Billy Joe and Daniel Dubois post the supposed quit, because to me, a quit, in this sense of the word, Quitting just means you stop trying, right? But in the sense of the word that people mean it, they mean it in a derogatory manner. They don't mean it literally. They mean it, oh, he's a quitter, as though it's a negative thing. Well, to me, in boxing, a quitter or a quit is someone who could have given a lot more, but chose not to. I don't see a serious injury which prevents you being able to continue, realistically speaking, in a safe manner. I don't consider that to be a quit when you're talking about a sport. So as a result, I was very defensive of both Billy Joe Saunders and Daniel Dubois. Now, a lot of people have said, oh, but Billy Joe, you know, if you're judging him by the standards he used against Daniel Dubois, then you have to call him a quitter too. No, because you can be critical of Billy Joe's outlook regarding Dubois without saying he's a quitter. So you could say, no, I don't think Billy Joe quit. By the same token, I don't think Daniel Dubois quit. I think Billy Joe was wrong about that. It doesn't mean that Billy Joe's a quitter necessarily. But Billy Joe wanted to clarify these things. And what he said is the difference was that Dubois chose to pull himself out, whereas Billy Joe didn't. It was his corner that made the decision. Now, whether you believe that story or not, whether you believe Billy Joe or whether he discontinued the fight himself, one thing that is true that Billy Joe said is that Billy didn't take a knee in the middle of the round. While injured, while not wanting to continue, you could argue, he continued to evade Canelo rather than just go down. He could have gone down. He could have gone down after that shot. He could have let Canelo hit him to the body and then taken a knee and made out like he couldn't get up. He chose to continue to evade, which suggests that there wasn't a quit in that moment. He didn't choose to just give up. That's what the suggestion says. But by the same token, Billy Joe threw out a nugget there, which is almost like a lifeline to Dubois. Because at first glance, it sounds like he's very critical, but then he says, but I'm lighter on my feet and I move better than Dubois. I'm a lighter guy and I move better than him. In other words, with my injury, I was still able to be evasive. Maybe Dubois wasn't. So he's essentially saying if Dubois could move like me and be evasive for that last over a minute of the round remaining post-injury, he may have continued to have been evasive. Maybe he would have continued to, he would have been willing to switch from stance to, something that Billy suggested that he was willing to do in order for him to have survived until the end of the fight against Joe Joyce. So he's throwing out that lifeline. He's saying, look, I'm essentially not critical of Dubois anymore, or rather, I didn't quit like he did, but maybe the reason he quit is just because he couldn't be evasive, right? So he's softened on his position a little bit. Let me know what it is you think about that. You know, has that changed your opinion of Billy Joe Saunders' position or his words about Dubois pre-fight? How do you feel about what Billy said regarding the quit? Do you believe his version of the story? Now, the other fact that I found fascinating, and this is what I meant when I was saying before about there are no throwaway comments. He calls the difference in opinion between Tibbs and Billy Joe Saunders as being a tiff between the two, and that he doesn't want to get involved in it. And he basically says he wanted to go out one more round and he was in agreement with his corner. But he also said on numerous occasions that sometimes a fighter needs protecting from himself, which suggests that intellectually he agreed with Ben Davison's position post-fight that he shouldn't have been allowed to carry on. But additionally, this is the bit I found to be fascinating, is that he talks about who visited him in the hospital post-fight. And he says that his dad and Ben Davison visited him in the hospital post-fight, which means an awful lot. He also goes on to say that those that were expected to be there, that he expected to be there, were there. Because loyalty is what matters. Is he suggesting that Tibbs is not loyal? That's how it came across. Now, I'm not taking sides here. I don't know any of these men personally. I've met Tibbs on a couple of occasions. So's my brother, and so have other people that I know, and not one person has had a bad word to say about him. As far as I'm concerned, he's always been a gentleman. But you don't know the relationships and the factors of relationships between people that are genuinely close. I don't know any of these people. I don't know who's loyal. I don't know who Billy feels has got his back. But don't you find that comment interesting? Have Billy and Tibbs fallen out based on something like this? It's interesting that Tibbs also said he hadn't heard from Billy Joe for so long. Why? Is it because Billy Joe has an issue with Tibbs? Or did Tibbs have an issue with Billy Joe? Did Tibbs feel that Billy Joe could have continued but chose not to, and he can't respect that? What is it? Let me know how you interpret this, because to me it makes for a very fascinating interview. There's also obviously talk of Eubank and the same old story being covered. Eubank calling him a quitter, calling himself the A-side. Billy Joe explaining that he beat him and has achieved so much more in his career, there's absolutely no way he could be the A-side, and so on and so forth. That I don't find as interesting. That's just a war of words where they're going around in circles, to be honest. I'd love to see the fight. But what I did find interesting is that Billy Joe also said that he'd be willing to fight again if the money's right and against the right opponent. Now, I did a video a while back talking about how he was contradicting himself a little bit with this statement. Well, he seemed to clarify it a lot more in this particular interview, whereby he's mentioned he'd be willing to come back for a Golovkin, even though he acknowledged that Golovkin is not the fighter he used to be. And he wonders whether he'd really even convince himself that he truly beat Golovkin, the real Golovkin, if he beats him at 40 years of age, and whether he'd get the credit for doing so. Additionally to that, he also says that he's willing to fight Demetrius Andrade. The other thing that I found interesting is that when talking about Liam Williams and Eubank, he speaks as though Williams would probably lose that fight. That's the hint I got from Billy Joe. He said that, yeah, he'd give it a real go, he says. He didn't say, yeah, he could win that fight, or yeah, he would win that fight, or I'd back him, or anything like that. He said, listen, it's a good clash of styles. You know, he did well against Andre. He fell short, but he's a good fighter, and, you know, he'd give it a real go. What does that mean? Doesn't that mean that he believes Eubank would win that fight? But he also consistently says he doesn't think Eubank's good enough to win a world title. The point I'm making here is that I liked this interview because although he was clearly willing to open up to IFL, maybe more than he would an independent journalist or a journalist from a big corporation that he doesn't have a relationship with, he's also had a long time to think about his answers to these questions. And so as a result, I don't believe any of them would have been off the cuff. I believe they were planned and they were said with an intent to have an effect. So let me know what you think that effect is. How do you interpret everything? Thanks for watching, everyone. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.